Hello and welcome to this week's video. I'm so delighted that you're joining me today from the comforts of my home office. This week's video is a bit different than my normal videos. This week we are going to be comparing the Nikon Z6 with the Google Pixel 7a from a nature photography perspective. This is a bit like comparing an apricot with a peach. They are inherently different things, but the final product looks very similar. This is not an unboxing video or an in-depth review of the Google Pixel 7a. We are simply comparing the final product. So in this case, the photos with each other. When I set out to do this particular video, I had a couple questions in mind. My first question was, how do the photos taken with the Google Pixel 7a compare to that of the Nikon Z6? So that was my first question. The second question that I had was, would I feel comfortable selling a photograph that I captured using my Google Pixel 7a? And if so, what size of file would I feel comfortable selling that photo as? Before we dive in to compare the photos, a quick little backstory. This is actually my fourth Google Pixel phone. So I had the OG, so the original Google Pixel. I had the 3A, and then most recently I had the Google Pixel 5. I know that there's a lot of cool phones that are out there on the market today, and my husband, for example, has the new Motorola Razr flip phone, and it does some pretty cool things. And I was this close to actually getting the Motorola Razr flip, but the main reason why I decided to stick with the Google Pixel actually had to do with the water resistant rating. With the Google Pixel 5, I dropped that at least a half dozen times in waterfalls and streams. So the water resistance rating was something that was really important to me from a photography standpoint and keeping my phone safe standpoint. So ultimately, that's why I stuck with the Google Pixel as opposed to switching to the Razr Flip. So how this video will work, for every single photo, I will label it whether it was taken with the Nikon Z6 or the Google Pixel 7a. For the Nikon Z6 photos, they were all taken as a raw file with the 24 to 70 millimeter f4 lens, and then they were all edited in Adobe Lightroom and then exported as a full res file. So when I say full res, I'm talking 300 dpi, and I did not resize the image. So the largest JPEG that I could export from Adobe Lightroom for that photo. For the Google Pixel 7a, I will label whether or not it was taken in what mode it was taken, so whether it was portrait mode or long exposure mode, or whether that photo was taken as a raw file. For both JPEG and RAW files with the Google Pixel 7a, they were also edited in Adobe Lightroom and then exported with the same settings as a full res file out of Lightroom as a JPEG image. So now that we kind of have that out of the way, why don't we dive in and take a look at some of the photos, and I will share my thoughts along the way as we go through this video. So for this first photo that we're going to look at is a picture of a mushroom that I photographed along a trail. When I compare the two photos, the Nikon Z6 photo is overall softer, so that background is nice and blurred out. There is the softness of the pine needles that are in the foreground, and really the only thing that's in focus is the top of the mushroom. When I compare that photo to the one with the Google Pixel 7a, you can still make out, even though this was photographed in portrait mode, you can still make out the trees that are in the background, and that foreground of the pine needles were very much still in focus and still a lot of details in there. And the entire mushroom was also very detailed in comparison to the Nikon Z6 photo. My preference between the two photos is the version of the Nikon Z6 that I captured in comparison to the Google Pixel 7a. An interesting thing that I learned while photographing with the Pixel 7a is that when you use the special mode, so portrait mode or long exposure mode, it will only capture the image as a JPEG, even if you have selected raw file. With the long exposure setting, it will capture two photos, two JPEG photos. It will have the original photo and then the AI generated photo. So you do come away with two photos, but of course, since it's as a JPEG, you do not have as much creative control with adjusting the white balance in Adobe Lightroom as you would with a raw file. Another interesting thing about photographing in the long exposure mode in the Pixel 7a is you have no control whatsoever with the shutter speed. The camera will automatically choose a shutter speed based on the lighting situation. In comparison, the Motorola Razr Flip has a Pro option in the camera, and so you can adjust the shutter speed and the ISO. So that's something that's kind of in favor of the Motorola Razr Flip when you compare the two. In this next photo of this waterfall up in the Blue Ridge Mountains, when we look at the camera settings of the Google Pixel 7a, you will notice that the shutter speed is 1/850th of a second, which would not generate that smooth flowing water. So that's all AI that's doing it. I would say overall, it did a pretty decent job when comparing it to the Google Pixel or with the Nikon Z6 in regards with how the waterfall flow looks. But one area that it did not do so well is if we zoom in on the bushes in the foreground. So with the Google Pixel 7a, the bushes got blurred too when the AI was doing its thing in the background. Where if you look at the photo that was taken in the Nikon Z6, the bushes are not blurry. So that was something that I kind of noticed is it does a pretty decent job, but it's not 100% perfect when you're photographing these type of scenes. So moving on to some photos that we're taking as raw files using the camera setting on the Google Pixel 7a. With being able to shoot in RAW, does give you a lot more creative control with your white balance and gives you all those kind of settings that you can manipulate photos with in Lightroom. But one thing that I noticed, and that actually has to do with the file size. So the raw file size and the JPEG, or the raw file size between the Nikon Z6 and the Google Pixel 7a. The Google Pixel 7a's raw files were actually still significantly smaller file sizes compared to the Nikon Z6. And this kind of has a couple downsides to it. One is because it is a smaller file, it means that you're not going to be able to print at a full resolution image as large as I could with the Nikon Z6. So that's one thing with the smaller file size. The other thing is you actually lose quite a bit of detail when you zoom in on the photos. So in this particular photo example, if we zoom in on this leaf that's kind of in the center of the frame of this American sycamore tree, you can see that with the Google Pixel 7a, you lose a lot of detail around the leaves. It's not as crisp and is not as sharp as the Nikon Z6 version of this photograph. So this loss of detail is largely due to this file, the size of the file. So if you have a larger file, it's going to be able to hold more data and more information than with your smaller file. And so that is why you're losing some of that details with the Google Pixel 7a version of this photograph. For this photo of the storm clouds, I feel like the Google Pixel 7a did an outstanding job of matching that of the Nikon Z6. I do believe that I used my case polarizing filter for my Nikon Z6 in this photo, and that is why the blues kind of in the skies look a little bit different between the two photographs. But I was really impressed at the level of detail that was retained within the clouds. And when I compare the two photos, there's not much difference. There's not like a big, huge loss in detail and stuff with the Google Pixel 7a version. And in fact, when I compare the two versions of the photo, I think I prefer the Google Pixel version of the photo compared to the Nikon Z6 version of the photo. So thinking through this exercise of comparing the photos, I found it really helpful to kind of go into the details of what the Google Pixel 7a was doing. So I do not know if you caught this or not, but every single photo that the Google Pixel 7a took, the aperture was f1.9. That kind of surprised me a little bit because I was expecting the aperture to maybe change, but the only thing that ever changed was the ISO and the shutter speed based on the lighting situation. So I just thought that was really interesting that the aperture throughout all the photos of the Google Pixel 7a did not change whatsoever. Even when I look at all the other photos on my phone, they were all f1.9. So I thought that was really interesting. when comparing the Google Pixel 7a photos amongst each other, one of the things that I think the Google Pixel does better at is the non-chaotic scenes. So your very simple scenes, it does very well. As soon as you get to more of a chaotic, busy scene, that's where you start losing the sharpness of the image. So I'm thinking specifically of that tunnel photo. There was just so much chaos that it lost a lot of the details in comparison to the Z6. So the Pixel does fairly well with your more simple scenes. It also does very well with intimate shots. So like for example, this photograph of my dog Suki, it did an outstanding job of capturing her. It also does well with like your abstract type of photos. So this example of some water droplets that are on the top of my car that I took during sunset. So I feel like it does pretty well with those simple type of intimate shots or simple scenes. So non-chaotic scenes, Google Pixel 7a does pretty well. So I feel like that does a pretty good job of answering that first question that I had. The second question of would I feel comfortable selling a photo that I took with my Google Pixel 7a? And the short answer is yes. The little bit longer answer is it would depend on the subject and the scene. So not every photo would I be willing to print that I capture with my Google Pixel 7a, but I would be willing to sell some photos that I took with my phone. When it comes to file sizes, I would feel confident selling a print at a full resolution of an 8 by 12 inch photo with the Google Pixel 7a. Depending on the subject and the scene, and the paper type, I may consider selling or printing a photo at 12 by 18 inches, but I would have to realize that I would be losing some of that resolution when I go up to that larger print in comparison to what I can print with my Nikon Z6. So those are my thoughts on the Google Pixel 7a and how it stacks up to the Nikon Z6. If you found this video helpful, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and in the comments section below, please share your thoughts on the comparison between the two photos, and if you would like me to maybe do a comparison video similar to this with the Motorola Razr Flip. And as a side note, I already have my next video recorded, which is of a waterfall hike in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So if you are not currently subscribed to my channel and you want to be alerted for when that video comes out, I would encourage you to subscribe now. Anyways, you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. We'll see you guys next time. Take care. Bye.